Okay. Does the fruit of the Spirit come into play? Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Because the fruit of the Spirit in us demonstrates our ability to be a clear branch. Yes? We take it from the vine and we clear out the gunk by the fruit of the Spirit. Now, turn to Galatians. Galatians 5. You know it very well. Verse 22. The fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. I have read that so many times. It almost just becomes another list to remember. Then I read it in the Message. Listen to this. When we live God's way, He brings gifts into our lives, much the same way that fruit appears in an orchard. Things like affection for others, exuberance about life, serenity. We develop a willingness to stick with things, a sense of compassion in the heart, and a conviction that a basic holiness permeates things and people. We find ourselves involved in loyal commitments, not needing to force our way in life, and able to marshal and direct our energies wisely. Oh, isn't that good? Very practical, I felt that was. The fruit of the Spirit is such that it allows us to take the nourishment from the vine and pour it into other people. It's important to remember that the gardener is God. He takes responsibility for preparing the soil of a person's heart. Yes? That means that when you pluck up the courage to say something about Jesus, God has already done at least half of the work. At least, just to get them ready. Now, understand what I'm saying. God has done all of the work of salvation that's required to bring us all to Christ. But how much easier is it for you to talk to a friend, a mate in college, someone at work, someone in the youth group, someone in the mothers and tots group, if you think at the back of your mind, God's already prepared this ready for me. And soil preparedness is what God does all the time. Now, what happens with a vine? Well, a vine is not left to grow untended. And whilst God can prepare the soil, He also is checking out the branches. And as I've said, sometimes He takes a branch off, and we'll come back to that in a moment. But not all removal of branches are because they're dead. Oh, did you know that? I remember, oh, bless his heart, James Richardson is a fabulous pastor, but did you also know he's a pretty good gardener? And one of the things a few years ago we had in our garden, we still have it, but then it was a massive rose bush, a climber called Compassion. Anyone know what I mean by a compassion? Yeah, we got some people with a compassion rose. You know it spreads beautifully. Great if you're not a brilliant rose grower, because it just goes. And it's beautiful. But there was a problem. It had grown too much. And James was doing some work in our garden, and he came in, and I said, do you know anything about pruning? Yeah, of course I do, he said, because he trained with the council parks department. Out come the secretaries, and I left him to it. Oh, my word. I came back and think, what have you done to my rose bush? And it was about 30% of the original. And I'm thinking, oh my, you've killed my compassion. You have so killed my compassion. But of course, you smiled and said, thank you, James. Lovely, great. And inside I'm going, help. The next year, I had about 4 roses, and I thought, he has killed my rose bush. told me he knew what he was doing. The next year, it flowered like you would not believe. He had done exactly what was needed to do. What had happened was that so many branches had got clogged together that it was actually suffocating the rose bush. By thinning it out, he'd given it 3 things. 1, room to breathe. 2, he'd made the plant balanced. And 3, the branches that remained were bushier and more fruitful. Do you know, sometimes God prunes things in our lives. He will take something away. And we panic because we think unless we're busy in the kingdom, that something's going wrong. Let me tell you, busyness, B-U-S-Y-N-E-S-S, is seductive. Cramming too much into a life and a diary is seductive. Why? We get caught up in the lie that doing more gives us significance. It's not true. Not true at all. The reality is it's better to do some things well than many things poorly. And sometimes God will have to come along and say, you know, I'm going to take that away from you because you're hanging on to it. And actually, you're crowding your life with so much, there's no room to breathe. There's no room to be balanced, and you can't be fruitful. So I'm going to take that away from you. John and I often have talks about multitasking. I hate that phrase. Because basically, multitasking means you do an awful lot of things not very well. And I would rather be efficient at a few and get them done right. And get them done right first time. And sometimes we can hold on, like my rose bush, to the wrong stuff that God wants to take from our lives. Sometimes that would be relationships. And we can get paranoid. Everyone's leaving me. I was talking to somebody the other day, and they'd had 3 key relationships with friends just go. And they actually said to me, do you think God is telling me I need to rely on him? And you step back and think, you're already doing the work, God. Sometimes that happens. And sometimes we have to remember that God takes things out of our lives in his time. We may think it's a horrible time, but for God it's a perfect time. The other thing, of course, about pruning is that sometimes God prunes things by actually removing the fruit. That's what a vine is designed for, is to bear fruit. And when the fruit is picked, part of the branch is pruned with it. And you think, I've been a really good branch. I've done it all right. Why is God taking the fruit? Well, because you've done your job right. Yes? That's what fruit is for. I remember my dear friend Meg Prem. Some of you will know her. Many of us had a privilege of knowing Meg. And I remember her funeral was an extraordinary day. And I shall never, ever forget Neil Prem's words. Her son Neil said, yes, my mum was young to be taken to heaven. But I'm convinced that God took her because she'd accomplished all that God had for her to do. Wow. What an accolade. Sometimes God will take things away from you that you think, oh, I was ministering to that person and they've come to know Christ and I've helped them grow and now they've gone. Does that mean I've done it wrong? No, it means exactly the opposite. You've done it right. But Satan will love to get in there and have a good old stir and say, oh, do you know, you were really doing well until, they've gone to be a pastor. Oh, for crying out loud. Yeah, maybe that was God's plan for that fruit all along.